How's it going, guys? Josh Olufemi here. Have you ever seen motion graphics that you've kind of mentally compartmentalized as something that you would never be able to make yourself? I mean, we see stuff like this all the time. Maybe it's an intro sequence to a TV show, or a really awesome lower third, or any type of animation that involves graphics being animated, a lot of the time with text. I have one answer for you in 2 words. After Effects. And I have an in-depth tutorial that's going to show you how to use this really powerful but really easy to use software presented by Olufemi member, one of my good friends, and one of my VFX mentors, Nick Koo. He's chilling over in Sydney, Australia. If you happen to live in Australia as well, comment below whether you're Team Woolies or Team Coles, and I'll tell you whether you're right or wrong. All right, guys, so I got 2 plane tickets, one for me and one for you, and we're gonna take an overnight flight down under to learn from this man of wonder. In addition, you're gonna realize with the more After Effects tutorials that you do, that you're gonna need a source of high quality, legal, and downloadable graphics to actually use in your animations in After Effects. This is where Envato Elements comes in. Envato Elements is a subscription service that gives you unlimited downloads for the most incredible stock footage, like fog and cloud overlays, aerial footage, fire, lightning. They also have incredible VFX packs, Premiere Pro and After Effects templates, sound effects, royalty-free music, literally anything that you'd need as a video editor. Just by clicking the link below, you'll automatically get a free first month. You'll see that free coupon for that free first month at the very last page when you're done signing up. Nick, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Josh. Just gonna dive straight into After Effects today. If you've never used it before, don't worry. It's not as hard as it looks. It is daunting to begin with because when I started using After Effects, I had no idea what I was doing. But thanks to some really great teachers and some great video tutorials, you can get there. And I'm gonna try and hold your hand through this whole process. So don't worry, we're gonna take you all the way from everything you need to know that is gonna be relevant to today's project to basically rendering out your own videos. So stay tuned, we're gonna take you all the way through and I'm excited to show you what we're about to do. So here we are, this is After Effects. You may or may not have seen this program before, but hey, look, basically I'm gonna assume that you know nothing about this program, so we're gonna dive right into it. The first thing you gotta know is what these different windows are. So we've got a whole bunch of these tools at the top here. The main things you're gonna have to know are this arrow, which is essentially the selection arrow. If you don't have that arrow selected, it's very difficult to basically select anything. The hand tool is a drag tool basically. The shortcut to that is just press spacebar. So if you're in this mode and you just want to drag this around, all you have to do is hold the spacebar and this will come up. This is the magnifying tool, which you won't really ever use. I never use it actually. There are keyboard shortcuts for this thing. This is the rotation tool. Again, pretty self-explanatory. If there's an object there and you want to rotate it, this is the rotation tool, which goes like this. Very different to the selection tool, which is used to move the objects around the canvas. This is a camera tool, which we'll cover a little bit later on. This is called the pan behind or the anchor point tool. Now, every object has an anchor point, which is this little crosshair thing here. So when you have the anchor point tool selected, it allows you to move that anchor point around. And why is that important? Well, it's mostly important for things like rotation and scaling. So I'll show you why that's important. Right now, you look at this object and you want to rotate it. So let's grab the rotation tool and it's rotating around the center, which is, what you'd expect it. However, let's move this pan behind tool and let's move it to this side and sort of closer to the edge. It doesn't have to be right on the edge, but you'll see what I mean. So if we start rotating things, it rotates from the edge over there. So you kind of think of it like a pin that you're pinning things down. And likewise, when you start scaling things, so to scale things, you can grab this tool, the arrow, the selection tool, and drag one of these corners down. And you can kind of see it drags according to where that is in the center. Likewise, if you use the pan behind tool and you moved it here and then you dragged it, drags from that corner there. The next item here is the shape tool, the rectangle tool. We'll come back, actually, let's come back to the shape tool because we're not quite there yet. This is also the pen tool, which we'll get through as well. Text tool, pretty self-explanatory. You just grab something and then you just type, hello there. Well, when I can see what I'm typing, hello there, but the text is very small. We'll just make that a little bit bigger. There you go, hello there, there you go. There is the text. I'm just going to ignore these next 3 tools because I never use them. They're to do with painting within After Effects and I never use these tools. The roto brush tool, basically used for rotoscoping, and then the puppet tool, which is great for animation. I didn't used to use it as much, but I do use it a lot now. We have the project panel here. This is essentially where you throw, if you use Premiere, this is your bin. It's effectively the place where all your assets and your comps and everything you're going to be using for the project is going to live. So it is wise to keep this place organized, because if you need to look for it, it's a lot easier when it's organized. We have a whole bunch of things down here as well. So this is the interpret footage tab. It's not really relevant for today's tutorial, so we're not going to go into much depth, but it just allows you to tell After Effects what kind of footage is coming in if it comes in incorrectly, or to set frame parameters or field parameters, etc. It gets very technical, so we're not going to go into it. This button creates a new bin, basically allowing you to organize your assets within the project folder, so it's very handy, especially if you have large projects. And finally, we have the new composition button, which we're going to use next. Firstly, we're going to make a new comp, so here we go. That's the new comp button. Now, a comp is basically a new scene or a new sequence for people in Premiere. Think of it like your window to your workbench, so people can see. They can't see all the messy parts, but they can see the final work through the composition. And so we're going to call this opening title. We're going to make this 1920 by 1080, square pixels. Frame rate can be whatever you like. I'm going to pick 24 just because that's kind of just a fun number to play around with. And you can have a start time code. Its default is 0, basically saying that the timeline starts at 0. And then we're going to make the duration 10 seconds because it's not a very long comp. Background color can be whatever you like, really. It doesn't have to be black. It can be white if you like. But that doesn't actually show up in the final composition if you override it with another background, which is exactly what we're going to do. So I'm going to press OK. And here we go. Here is, I'm going to make a new folder. So I go to bin, lesson 1.1. Here we go. I have actually already done this, so I'm trying to do this again. Okay, so now that we've set the comp up, it's probably a good time now to basically save the project. So all you have to do is go up to File, Save Project. You can press Save As or Save. I just like to press Save. We'll just do Save As because I've already done this. But it'll just bring you to a dialog box, and we're just going to name it. So we'll just call it My First After Effects Project. Now, important to that is to make sure that your autosaves are turned on. So I would suggest going to the tab up here where it says After Effects and go to Preferences and then go to Autosave. Now, by default, this, I don't remember, but I think it is turned on now, but it is worthwhile checking just to be sure. So save every 20 minutes or however long. You can say 30 minutes. I like to save every 15 minutes actually, so I don't know, I should change that to 15. And maximum project versions, I'm actually going to make that 10 because I actually like it 10. And you can save it right next to the project or in a custom location, wherever it is. I like to keep it next to the project because now I know where it is. So we're just going to click OK. And that is done. So right at the bat here, you have this is the comp. So if we click on this, you can see this is the comp right here. Lots of checkered squares, looks a bit like a giant chessboard. We're going to turn off the transparency grid for a second. So that's this little checkered button down here, which is already checked for me. I usually have it on by default, but you might not want it. So we're just going to turn that off. One thing that I always dislike is sometimes adaptive resolution is turned on. And I hate it because it doesn't give me an accurate representation and sometimes the quality drops too much. The comp window here is a viewer window, effectively the same thing as Premiere. This is where all the action happens. So this is where you're going to drag and move everything around. This is your workspace. So this is where you're going to make all the magic happen. You have a couple of settings here that you can muck around with. One of the most relevant ones is the quality setting. Now, this doesn't mean the final quality of the render will be this quality. It's just so that you can see things. After Effects, when it gets down to nuts and bolts of it, can be a very heavy program to use. So you just need to be aware that if you need to toggle between quality settings, you can do that here. At the moment, I set it on auto because at this point, this project that we're going to do is not particularly heavy. This essentially is the toggle the mask and shape path visibility, and this is more relevant later. Kind of not obvious right now, but I'll show you soon. And here we are. We have this. We have basically the various guidelines. We have title safe action, which is this. Again, doesn't render up on screen. It's just there as a guide. These are just guides, all of them. We also have. We can turn this off, and we can show the proportional grids if you want that. You can modify those proportional grids as well. You can have a general grid as well. And rulers will come up So we'll turn rulers on just so you can see what they are. If you use Photoshop, you'll know very much what these are. So if you want to set up your own grid, all you have to do is drag in the top, where the black corners here and the empty corners here, and just drag in some rulers for different things as well. So we're going to create our first item. And so we're going to go here. We're going to make sure this is selected. The selection tool is selected. We're going to come down here, and with the right click, we're going to click new and then create our first thing, which is a solid. It's just going to be a black solid. We're just going to make it black. So just go OK. And that is our first item. Now, as you can see here, nothing very exciting because, well, quite frankly, it's just a black solid in a black screen. We've created our first solid, which is great. Now we're going to create a little bit of a light vignette in the background. So what we're going to do here is we're going to click on this solid and we're going to duplicate it and then create a different color out of it. So what we're going to do is go up, we're going to select the black solid, and we're going to go to edit, and we're going to go down and we're going to select duplicate, which is Command D or Control D, depending if you're on a Mac or a PC. Now, we've just created a black solid, which is, you know, fine. But what we want to do is we want to edit the color of this solid. Now we can go to layout and we go to solid settings, and you can see it says Shift Command Y or Shift Alt Y if you're on a PC. I'm going to click on that, and let's just make it a nice, you know, warm blue. There you go. You can kind of see it changing right now. And there we go. Now, I was talking about mask before, right? So this is the mask tool. Now, the mask tool is kind of fun because there are lots of different shapes you can pick from. Now, if you just select that and then you select the mask tool, you can see it draws a rectangle and it draws a mask around the item that you have. What's cool about this though is you can also invert it and select everything except the item that you're selecting. So it's kind of good if you need to make masks like that. Now, we want to get a circle. There's different tools you can use. There is the square rectangle tool, which gives you rounded edges. We also have the ellipse tool, which is what we're going to be using. Now you can see here is it gives you an oval, an uneven oval, basically a squished oval if you just drag it out. However, if you hold Shift, like I am, you get a perfect circle. And then you can double click on it and then you can move it to the center. Just to cover the other ones that are there, you can see there is a polygon tool, which ironically is a pentagon, but it gives you a hexagon as the default shape. Don't ask me why, it just does. Which is not wildly relevant, but it is there. And a star tool, again, for those star wipes you want to do. Now let's grab the circle tool, the ellipse tool, and we're just going to hold Shift, and we're just going to drag one out on top of the blue, and we're going to mask it. And we're just going to double click on it, and so these bounding boxes come up, and then we're going to move this to the top, just so that, you know, they're roughly about the center. It doesn't have to be exact, roughly about the center and about half the circle. All right. Now, what we're going to do here is when you created the mask, you've got a whole bunch of properties. So if you see the mask here, we've got mask 1, and you got a whole bunch of properties here. So actually, let me just bring this back down just so to illustrate the point a little bit better. The mask path here, the first property here is the mask path. Now this is essentially just related to animation of the mask. Now if we were to set a keyframe, and I'll explain keyframes in a set, but just so you understand the principle here, and in animation, if you set a keyframe and then set another keyframe where the shape is different, for example, we move the mask down here, you'll see the shape actually moves. So that's effectively what the mask path property is there for if you want to have moving masks. It's great for rotoscoping or you just want to do shapes that move. The mask feather seems pretty explanatory. Just if you dial it up, you can see the edges become very feathery. The opacity deals with the opacity of the mask, or how the opacity of how the mask affects certain things. And the expansion is, well, you guessed it, it expands the path of the mask shape. This can all be used in conjunction. You can feather it and then expand the mask as well, likewise. So again, super useful and good to know, because we're going to know a lot more about that later. So we're going to move this back up again to where we were. Now what we're going to do is we're going to click on the feather, and we're going to feather it out as much as we can, around 1,000. Let's just 1,000. We couldn't, and I'm just saying older versions of After Effects, you couldn't do 1,000. I think 1,000 was the max. But in this case, we're going to go to about 1000. Now, right now, we could drop the mask opacity to get the opacity down, but that's just not good practice in my opinion. I like using the actual opacity on the object itself. So let's go into those properties itself. Now, this is just a general object, and most objects will have slightly different parameters. A solid object will have different parameters to a text object, will have different parameters to a shape object, for example. But in this case, we're just looking at a plain solid object. So let's twirl down one of these objects for a second, and these are both classified as solid, so just keep that in mind. So let's twirl this down. What have we got here? We've got the mask layer, but we put that on ourselves. But what else we got here? We have a transform. Right, so here's all the transform properties, and likewise, we can see, oh, there we go. We can move things around. We can scale things up and down. We can have the anchor point move up and down as well. Rotation. We have all the nice properties here. Now that's all great. And we also have opacity. Now, the reason why I choose opacity rather than choosing the opacity of the mask, which I saw there, is because this opacity from a shortcut point of view is way easier to access than this one, because you have to twirl down and get to this opacity. But watch this. There's a couple of cool shortcuts you can use with a lot of these with a lot of these main properties. The first one you can use is P, and that automatically brings up the global positioning property. You can also press R, and that brings up the global rotation property for this thing. You can also press T, and that brings you the global opacity property for this thing. And that's why you want to try and use the global property as much as you can, just so it's easy to get access to. Because if it's something like a mask layer, it's not that it's impossible to get to it, it just takes a little bit longer to get there. Now we're going to drop this a little bit to, let's drop this opacity to about there. Let's say 47. Let's say 40. We can actually type in 40. So you can actually click on it, and when this gets highlighted, you can actually type in actual numbers yourself, or you can just click on it and just muck around and see what you like. All right. Now we're going to do one more thing. We're going to add another color. Now, colors that complement this warm blue are magenta. So we're going to try that as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to edit, and we're also going to duplicate it again. Or if you like, you can just press Command D or Control D if you're on a PC. Now, likewise, if you were going to do the solid, we're going to go to the solid settings again, and we're going to pick another color. Now, it's obviously overlapping with the blue, and that's not great. So what I'm going to do is, now carefully, we're not going to select the object, which, as you can see here, is if you select the object, you can see this nice nasty line at the top here, and that's because the mask is working within the constraints of the shape itself. And what I mean by that is that if we were to turn off the mask, M is the shortcut to get to the mask. You press M, and then we turn off the mask. You can kind of see the whole. This whole object here, this solid object is only what's visible is only affected by what's in the mask. So we're not pushing around the solid, we're pushing around the mask. So if we turn that back on again, and then we double click on the mask, the solid stays still, but the mask will travel. And that's where we get things like, this is where we can kind of muck around with things. So just keep that in mind. If you see edges that are really sharp and they shouldn't be in your composition, it's probably because the solid is moved. So we've got our background sorted. Let's get into the text tool. Now, the text tool is this tool up here, the big T, pretty obvious. Now we're just going to type in some letters. So all you have to do is just go onto your main timeline here and click on that, and then click here, and automatically this cursor comes up. Now you can type whatever you like. There is a character window that is here, and if it's not here, where you can find it is going to Window, and right underneath here there is a character window, and that'll pop up somewhere in your timeline. Likewise, I would suggest having paragraph and effects and presets. You'll need both those things up as well. Got the text here, and we're going to call this After Effects tutorial. I know, super original. Don't at me, guys. All right, now let's change this to a font that I actually like. So we're gonna go ITC Avant-Garde. Doesn't have to be this font. I just like this font because it's my jam. The problem here is that, you know, you're working on a project and maybe you think, oh, I don't like the name of this. Maybe I want to change it, or maybe I want to reuse this. So let's call this After Effects is the best. Now, you spend all that time centering it, but it's kind of annoying because it's not centered again, and you're like, oh, and why is it not centered? And it's like, and maybe you just wanted the word to say After Effects, and it's like, well, now it's not centered again. So what can we do? Well, if there's a couple of properties up here, there's the paragraph properties here, and there's the character properties here. So what we want to do is we want to double click on this and then select the center. Now, the reason why you want to select center is that when you start moving things around, now let's just say let's bring up our crosshairs here. So remember I told you about the grid and guidelines. We're gonna bring up the title safe, and that tells you directly where everything is in the center. So let's say we line it up in the center here. Now that it's centered, when you do retype things, everything is basically centered in the middle, justified in the middle. Basically just like a Word document, right? If you want to make quick adjustments, I would suggest sort of making all your text stuff justified to the way that you would like it. So if it is going to be in the middle, make sure it's justified to the middle. If it is justified to the right, like if we do this and justified to the right, and you know that it's always going to come from the left to the right, then, you know, do it that way. Otherwise, likewise, if you want to do it from right to the left, do it that way, so that when you do change the text, it's always going to be lined up to there. But in this case, it's always going to be lined up to the middle. So we're going to bring it to the middle. Now, if you want to quickly get it to the middle, the quickest way to do it is to hold down Command or Alt and press Home, right? And that brings it straight back to the middle. And that's just a really easy way to do it. Now, if you can see here, the anchor point, unfortunately, is actually not in the middle of this thing. And to be honest, you could center it using this tool, which is fine, but you don't really know if you've got it right dead center. And I dare say I don't really have it right in the center. Now I'm using my wheel mouse to zoom in and out, but you can easily just use the comma or plus button at the bottom next to, just above the space bar to zoom in and out, and use the space bar to move around, hold down the space bar and the mouse to move around to get right into the nitty gritty of things. But I'm just using my mouse just so you're aware to zoom in and out. You can set that up on your mouse as well. It's not a big deal. I'm using the mouse wheel, but full stop and commas to zoom in and out of your timeline. You could also use the magnifying glass, but honestly, don't do that. All right, so this is not bad, but just say, you know, for whatever reason, and it will happen, just say the anchor point is out here for some reason and you need to get it back to the center. I don't want to actually do this every single time because that actually happens more often than not, more than I'd like. So I'm going to try and center this, and I can only give you the shortcut for this because I actually don't know where it is in the menu. I couldn't find it, but if you hold down Option, Command or Alt and Home, it will actually bring the anchor point back to the center, and that is dead center of the object of what you've selected. Works for pretty much everything. There's a couple instances where it might not work, but for pretty much everything else, it does work. So you're welcome. Anyway, so here we go. Let's call it After Effects tutorial. All right. Let's do a little bit of kerning on here. So let's just make the letters a little bit wider. So, you know, just so it just looks a little bit cooler. And let's just bring this up just a touch. I actually think that text is just a little bit big, so let's just bring it down just a touch. You could alternatively do it using the scale property. So if you press S, you can actually scale things through that as well. But I just like setting my type set correctly first and then mucking around with things afterwards, because I don't like scaling things, because scaling things are... It's really potato really, but that's just the way I like to do it. That's my personal preference. So you're welcome to do it with the scale as well, but I prefer you typesetting it first and then doing other tweaks later. All right, and now we're going to make a second title. So we're just going to duplicate this. So Command D or Control D, and we're just going to drag this down, and we're going to call this our first tutorial. And I'm just going to shrink this down again, make this like a subtitle, and bring this up here. All right, so there you go. That's kind of how you set those titles up. Now, what we're also going to do is just put a little bit of an effect on here. Now, we're going to put our first effect on. So if we go up here, there's an effects and presets tab up here, which has a lot of things in it. And you know, I dare say there is actually nobody who actually knows all about every single plugin that's in here. There's a lot of mysterious plugins here, and I'm still discovering a whole bunch of them. But there's a lot of great built-in ones here. And one of the ones I want to introduce you to first is one called Gradient Ramp. Now, I'll show you what that is once I get it. So Gradient Ramp. I gotta type the whole thing in because it's hard to find. All right, so Gradient Ramp. Here we go. So for the most part, Gradient Ramp is, well, it's a gradient ramp. If you ever use something like this in Photoshop, you'll see what it is. But effectively, it just makes a ramp for you on any object, effectively, with an alpha channel. Or even without the alpha channel. If it's just a solid, it'll just go from black to white straight away. And I'll just show you really quickly on an example. So let's just make Gradient Ramp. So an example here, if I make a new solid, and to make a new solid super quick, if you want shortcuts, Alt Y will get you a new solid, and you just make your color super quick. Now let's drag that gradient ramp onto here, and you'll see exactly what it does. From the top color is the start color, and the bottom color is the end color. And that's essentially all that is. It's just creating a gradient ramp from top to bottom. That can be thrown on pretty much anything. All right, so now you know what that is. Let's go back to the opening title. So we've got the gradient ramp here just to kind of give it a little bit of a cooler ramping look on the tutorial. Now we might want to actually reverse that. I actually want to make it look like the light's coming from the other way. So what's really cool with gradient ramp is you just swap the colors, and that's pretty much it. It's a little bit dark at the bottom, so I'm just going to pull the last color out just a little bit so the black isn't so deep it's hard to read. I'm going to drag this effect straight onto, I'm going to copy this effect, so we can just go, if we just select the effect here, go edit copy, and then go onto the second piece of text, and we go edit paste. You could easily use Control V and Control V and Control C, just like in Word to do it. Now you can kind of see the ramp points have moved. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull these down so they're nice and kind of what we want to see. And there you go. We've got our first. There we go. Now we're not looking too bad. Alrighty. So let's get on to the next section, which is basically creating a type-on effect for the second title. Now that is really straightforward, and it's something that just kind of, just adds a little bit of, quick animation. There's a whole lot of text presets that I'm not going to go into here, but a lot of them semi-useful, a lot of them not. I would say I hardly ever use text presets for anything. I usually design my own because I'm a bit special that way, but I would, there is one preset that I use quite a lot, and it's just simple and it's tasteful, and it's just the typewriter preset. So if you look up for typewriter, here we go, typewriter, animate in, and we're just going to drag it on. And you can kind of see here, it disappears, which is not great. But if you press play or spacebar, here's what happens. You can kind of see that here it is, it's playing back. Now, that's a bit slow. Now I want to speed that up. So how do you do that? Okay, so what's happened here, just so you understand in a very generic sense, is that I've just dragged an effect. Sorry, not an effect. I've just dragged a preset onto this piece of text, which the text knows how to interpret. And if you go to the text, if we twirl this down, and I was telling you how it depends on the object, this is a text item. It has different parameters. And what you didn't see beforehand was that this animator was not there. So it's just added an animator onto the text, and it's added a couple of keyframes, which is which is all designed. And so as you can see here, the keyframes are there. So what we want to do is drag these keyframes in just a little bit so it types a bit faster. And there you go. It's typing a lot faster. I will explain keyframes in a sec, but just so you understand, just these little diamonds are called keyframes, and these are essentially telling After Effects how to go from one point to another. So the first point here is that it's telling you it doesn't want any letters, and then the second point here is telling you that it wants all the letters. So it's just figuring out, okay, what do I need to do to get from no letters to all letters, and it goes from left to right. There's a couple more parameters in there that basically tell the tell the animator how to behave, but for the most part, that's all you really need to know. So there you go. That is our first animation in this After Effects tutorial. Now, the second one I want to do is to basically make this top title appear out of nowhere, almost like it's rising out of the ground. Not the bottom of the screen, but just imagine there is a piece of ground plane here and it's rising out of nowhere. So what we need to do for that is create an object called a mat. Now a mat is very much just a very simple shape that we're just going to create using a shape tool. So not a solid. You could use this doing a solid, but I'm going to use a shape tool in this instance. So here's the shape tool. We're going to grab the rectangle tool, and we're going to go, and there are two parameters up here. We've got the fill tool and the stroke tool. So what we're going to do here is we're going to grab the fill tool. We're going to fill it in with something really obnoxious, like green is good, because it means if we see it on screen, it means that we forgot to turn it off. And that's exactly what we want to do. And up here, the stroke is set to 0.5. We don't care about the stroke right now. What we're going to do is we're going to turn it off. So click on the word stroke. There are a couple of parameters here. We've got no stroke. We've got a solid color, a linear gradient, and a radial gradient. For the meantime, we're going to click no gradient. No stroke. And so it is empty. Now let's create our rectangle. So what we have to do is go from a corner that is outside the screen, and then we're just going to drag it all the way to the other side. Now what you want to do is make sure that the green is covering the bottom of that word. Doesn't be exact, but good enough. And make sure it's covering the top of that as well. Now, see what I'm saying by obnoxious? We're not going to see this green, and we want to make sure we never see this green. So that's why I always make them obnoxious colors, because I don't want to see them. And if I do see them, I don't want them accidentally popping up in my comps. So that's why I have them there. Now, this After Effects word, the text for After Effects is here. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to use the left click, and we're just going to hold on it and drag it up so it's above the word Our First Tutorial. Now we've got a couple of parameters here. Now if you can't see this, we've got mode and track matte, and so we got mode, transparency, and track matte. So we got these three things. If you can't see them, you may need to toggle this switch here, or alternatively, you need to turn on one of these bad boys here. You probably need to have this. You'll just have to click around until you find it, but that's exactly what we're looking for. And so you've got the word normal, and then you've got the word none. That's basically the default for any After Effects item that comes in, and they all have it apart from a handful of things. This one doesn't have it. The reason why this particular item doesn't have it is not because it's a shape layer, but because it's the first in the list. As you can see here, After Effects now does not have a track matte above it, and you'll see why in a second. So what we want to do is effectively, I'm just going to turn the opacity down just so you understand what I'm saying. What we want to do effectively is that the word After Effects will only appear within this green square, but if it's outside the green square is what we want to do. So if it appears down, if it's down here, it won't be visible. So what we're going to do is get the shape. What we're going to do is tell the word to inherit the area above it, and telling it that the area above it is the only place it's allowed to be visible, and any area outside the area is invisible. And you do that by using this thing called a track matte. And so if you go here where it says none, click the first option, which is alpha matte. And you'll see that the green square will suddenly disappear. And voila. Now that's just now that the After Effects tutorial, now that the text After Effects tutorial has inherited the property of the one above it, it's now aware that, okay, I see the shape above me, and now I know where I can be and where I can't be. So let's set our keyframe here. So we're going to press P to bring up the position properties of this particular text tool. So press P. And now we're going to set a keyframe. So this little stopwatch here is it allows you to set a keyframe. So we're going to set one around here, around the 121. Actually, that's a bit too fast. Let's make it around the 15. Let's make it around 13. So we're going to set around the 13 frame mark. We're going to click here. And now we're going to go back to the very beginning. So it's at 0, 0, 0. And we're going to grab this positioning tool. You can kind of see here, or you can just drag it and just drag it all the way down. Now you can kind of see it's a little bit crooked, so we don't want that. Hold shift when you do drag it down, and it'll just go straight down or if you will go this way, it will go straight across, but it'll only go in one direction. So only one axis, which is what we want. And you kind of see here what I'm saying, it disappears. So when you do play it back and we press spacebar, you can kind of see it appears out of nowhere. Now, if you, rather than me clicking through and watching it over and over again like that, which is super annoying, I like to set up my playback so it's very short. Now, one thing here in the timeline here, this big gray bar is called the work, is basically the work area. And so it's too long in terms of what I want to preview. And if I only want to preview here to here, I don't want to wait for it to play all the way to the end and then come back, because that's 10 seconds. So if I just want to preview a certain area, let's just drag this back here. And now when we preview, it'll just play back that section just so we can kind of see what the motion is like. It's a little bit easier. Sometimes you just want to watch stuff over and over again just to get an idea of effectively how to do, how the animation is looking. All right, that's not looking too bad. There's a couple of things we can definitely fix with this. So let me introduce you to one of the coolest things in After Effects, and that is about easing keyframes. Now, what is that? What does that even mean? Well, in a nutshell, the way that the text comes up is really rigid. It doesn't look very nice. It kind of just comes up and just goes clunk, right? Like clunk. It's not pretty. We want to basically introduce it so that it gradually comes to a stop. That's what they call easing keyframes. Now, as an example, I'm just going to show you two examples here. We've got linear keyframes and ease keyframes. Now, I'm just going to turn off the ease keyframes for a second, just so you understand what I'm talking about. So here you can kind of see the ball is going from left to right. It looks like it almost doesn't quite bounce with the walls, but it's very jarring. It just goes left to right. Almost like, you know, there's no momentum, there's no energy transfer. It's just going backwards and forwards in a very linear fashion. However, if I do put ease keyframes on this, you can kind of see that it kind of slows down towards the ends, almost like it's trying to come to a stop. And that looks a little bit more organic from an animation point of view, and it's kind of what we're trying to go for. Now, if you kind of see these both together side by side, it's very obvious to see that the ease keyframes are a lot more appealing than the linear keyframes. And you kind of see, if we do a frame by frame comparison, you kind of see the frames in the linear one are all constantly moving at a very constant rate across the screen, whereas the ease keyframes slowly speed like further apart towards the middle and closer together at the end. So that's what we want to do. And so to get easing keyframes, and I'll just show you really quickly what these look like as a comparison. So if we were to look at the keyframes of these two things, you kind of see, right, this is the keyframe for the linear one. You kind of see the transfer energy is exactly the same at the top as it is to the bottom. If we look at the eased one, you can kind of see it slowly starts out, gets a little bit faster, and then slows down at the top, and then gets faster at the bottom and comes down slow at the bottom. And that's kind of like a natural progression, kind of like thinking like a bike rider. You wouldn't see a person riding a bike starting like at this, going at the same speed at the bottom of the hill as it would be at the top of the hill and then coming down. There'd be a difference in transfer of energy, right? So that's why I feel like easing keyframes is usually better than non-easing keyframes. I'm sure there'd be circumstances where you would need linear keyframes, but I haven't seen them yet. Anyway, so here we go. So the easiest way to get linear ease keyframes here is to drag these two, to select these two keyframes. You just left click and draw a box around them, and then we're going to right click on them, and we're going to go keyframe interpolation. And we're going to go keyframe assistant, and we're going to go easy ease. And watch this. Actually, that doesn't look very obvious, but it is better. It's very subtle, but it is better. Yeah, that is definitely better than what we had before. So that's a very long way, winded way of saying try to easy ease all your frames because they look way better. All right, now. All right, so we've got the text animating on, we've got the nice reveal coming on. Now let's just, we're going to basically make this easy to move around so that we can make this one object that is tied to another object, and we're going to create our first parent object. So what we do is use this thing called a null layer and a null object. So we're going to create a new null object, so new layer null object, and put it on there. It's by default, it comes in dead center. I know the box is not dead center, but that anchor point is dead center. Just trust me on that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to click on these three items. You see this little swirly thing? What I want you to do is drag that swirly thing and drag it up to the word null 4, or whatever the null object tends to be. Now what this means is that now this null object can be you can drag this item around and it doesn't affect anything else. Like all the animation you set up will not be affected because now you've got a null object that parents everything around. The only thing it does, unfortunately, the only thing it does affect is the gradient ramp. So just keep that aware. There is a technical limitation with the gradient ramp in that it doesn't seem to stay mapped to the coordinates of the particular object. It's sort of like it's mapped to the global positioning of the comp, which is a bit annoying. So just keep that in mind, because if you do move it up, you're going to have to go through and you're going to have to basically remap the effect again, which is a bit annoying. But that's the only thing. But other than that, if you didn't have an effect like that on it, it would be awesome. Anyway, so here we go. So that's great. Now we're going to create the circle background that we saw in the intro. So first off, we're going to switch these around. We're going to make this empty, and we're going to make this a fill, and we're going to make it 1. Now let's also go in here and let's make a new comp. Let's call this circle widget. Everything else will be the same, 1920 by 1080, 24 frames a second. Let's make it around 20. Let's make it around 20 seconds. All right. Sorry. If you named your comp and it was wrong, you can just click on it, press enter, and then you can just rename it. So let's call it circle widget. All right. Now we want to create a perfect circle. Let's do that. So we click on this item, we go and we just hold down the shift button and we drag it out. Now, remember that shortcut I told you before? Option Alt Home will, we want to make sure the anchor point is completely centered, because in order to be able to rotate around the perfect axis, it needs to be directly in the center. So make sure it's Option Home. Option Command Home will basically make sure that it is completely centered. The origin point is directly in the middle of the circle. And then press Command Home to bring it directly to the center. All right. Now this is a shape. Shapes are a little bit different to solids in that it's a vector and it's continuously rasterized, which is awesome for lots of different reasons. If you see here, the ellipse tool has a lot of different parameters you can do. For example, the ellipse path has a size function, which is really great. You can muck around the positioning, but I wouldn't recommend that right now. It has a stroke function. There are a whole bunch of things you can muck around with here. You can muck around with the stroke width as well. You can also add a couple of dashes if you wanted to. I mean, really make those dashes really stand out. You could see there's a whole bunch of things you can do with the shape tools, which is really fun. And you can also fill. You can do gradient. You can also do gradient fills if you want. For example, I was talking about the gradient fills. You can muck around with this sort of stuff where you set the gradient points in the you can set the gradient points, and you can do fun stuff like that. We're not going to focus on that right now, but you can kind of do that stuff anyway. All right, let's just turn that off, the gradient fill off, because we don't need that. So along with that, it comes a whole bunch of other functions that are built into the shape layer. And one of them is these animating tools as well. We're only going to focus on one of them at the moment, which is called the trim path tool. And we're just going to click on that. So what does trim path do? It does exactly what it sounds. It trims the path. So we're going to go to around 14 frames, 15 frames. Oops, it's 15 frames. And we're going to set a keyframe here on the end property. Now we're going to go to the beginning and we're going to make this 0. So watch what happens. Draws on. Perfect. That's all we want. Now, I don't want it to draw a full circle because I want it to keep animating after it's drawn the full circle. So let's draw it to about 75. And so what's going to happen is that it's just going to draw a 3/4 circle. Great. That's what we want to see. Now, because this is already centered, what's great about this now is that when we do spin it around, it is spin it right dead center, which is perfect. So what we want to do is we want to basically keep this spinning around indefinitely. Now we could set a keyframe very easily and just go, all right, here we go. We're going to spin this keyframe around and that'll keep spinning around. And probably for all intents and purposes, that'll probably be enough for this animation. But you know, I have a tendency to want to cheat these things because I don't like keyframing if I can help it. So what can we do? I don't want to keyframe it definitely, especially if things have to change or whatever reason. So I like things just rotating by themselves. And the easiest way to do that is to use expressions. Now, don't be afraid. Expressions aren't the end of the world. It's a little bit of coding, but super easy. And that's one of the best things about After Effects is that you can code your problems away. All right, so here we go. We're going to hold down on the option and we're going to click on we're going to click here on the stopwatch. And you're going to see what happens. It turns red. The parameter turns red, and nothing really happens. Like nothing happens, right? That's because we haven't told it what to do yet. But this essentially opens up the hacker's window for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to type in the word time, lowercase time, no capitalization, and we're going to see what happens. Now you can't really see it, but it is rotating very slightly. Now, if you look at the parameters here, it has changed. It's gone from 0, and if we come up to the 8-second mark, it's gone to 8 degrees. Now, why is that? Well, because what we've told the computer to do is to inherit whatever is happening at the current time. So if it's 8 seconds, it's saying it's going to be 8. It's going to be 8 degrees. Which is fine, but it's a little bit slow. So what we can do to increase that by a factor is we'll times it by a factor of, say, 50. So that is the star. If you hold down Shift 8 and then multiply it by 50 and press Enter, this is what happens. Now it starts to speed up a little bit more. You can see the numbers rapidly changing according to the time. So that is basically the current time times 50, and because time is always moving, the object will always be moving. Now we're going to make this a little bit more interesting. We're going to duplicate this, so Command Option or Alt D. Now we're going to just shrink down the circle just a touch. We're going to go to the first parameter of the ellipse path, and then we're going to shrink it down just a little bit. And we're also going to make it a little bit thicker, so we're going to go to like a 4. And not just that, we're going to change the trim path to the last point of the trim path to around 30. Now let's make it 20. All right, cool. Let's have a look at it now. So that's fine. What I don't like is this circle traveling in the same direction as, like, spinning in the same direction as the other one. So how can we fix that? Well, let's have a look at the rotation property again. So press R to bring up the rotation property for the object. And you can kind of see here, we're going to twirl it down and then we get the expression. So here we go. Now, if you're a maths buff, you probably know the answer to this, but what we're going to do is we're going to make it go in the opposite direction. So instead of multiplying it by the positive factor of 50, we're going to multiply it by a negative factor of, let's say 30, just to make it a little bit different in both directions. And here we go. Now you can see there we've got our little circle widget happening in the background, and we haven't done any keyframing. We've programmed it all. Look at you little hacker. Did this all yourself. All right. Now let's go back to the opening title. Now let's drag our little circle widget in here. So we're going to drag it in underneath the word our first tutorial, just so it's there. And as you can see here, that's kind of what we've created, which is kind of cool because if you kind of isolate it, you can isolate things here. If you see a thing here, the first little round check button here, that's a solo button. You kind of look what we've got. That's all it is with an alpha channel on the back. And if I turn the alpha channel on, you'll see that it's transparent. You can't really see it very well, but the circle is there and it is sitting on transparency. So you dragged it on and it's a transparent background that you can just kind of throw in there however you like. And that's pretty straightforward, pretty decent. All right, so basically we've got this set up. Now we need to add a little bit of movement to the situation. And this is what we're going to add to the composition to basically give it a little bit more coolness. So what I'm going to do now is start introducing 3D. Now it's not as daunting as you think it is. You just need to understand how it works, and then it's pretty easy to get your head around it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch this toggle setting till we get to, you can see these things here. It looks like a guy hiding behind a wall, and there's a 3D box, there's an overlay adjustment thing, there's these little circles. And you see the word FX come up here. Now we want to turn everything here from the circle widget to the null object, and the way I'm doing that is holding down and pressing shift, holding down shift and then clicking on the null, and it selects everything in between. Now we click on that and it will actually turn everything on. So that turns everything into a 3D layer. So what does that mean? Well, let's have a look at it from the side. So if we go here, we can actually see it says active camera, front, left, top, back. Let's just look at the top. Now, right now, you have to kind of use your imagination here, but everything is sitting on one layer here. So if you can imagine, this is just a 2D world. But what we want to do is actually move things so that, if you can imagine, we're going to move the footage of the circle widget towards the back. So I'm going to see if I can split this into two views so you understand what I'm talking about. So we're just going to try and what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that this stays at the top, and this one, we'll make sure this is the active camera. So this is what I'm trying to do. So you can kind of see here, I've selected the circle widget footage that we just had, and it's just a card. Think of it just like a card, right? We've basically stacked all the cards and they're all stacked on top of each other right now in the same dimension. See what happens though when I drag this. See, this is the footage I've dragged here. See this little widget here? This is the Z widget. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start pushing it back. As you can see here, it starts getting further and further away from us. And that's because if you can kind of see the composition from a top point of view, the object is moving further away from the object in front, which is these three objects. So just so you understand this, I'm going to switch to a custom view. Let's hope that it switches to this one, custom view. Now, if you can kind of see here in a 3D situation, just for the points of this demo, you don't really understand, you don't really need to understand how to do this, but you can kind of see the three-dimensionalness of what's happening here. I've pushed that element back, and so now that element in the back is actually, according to the computer, sitting in a space behind it. So that's what we kind of want. So if we go to the top view again, what I'm going to start introducing now is a camera. So we're going to click here in the empty space and go new camera. And we're going to select a 2-node camera and a 50mm. And we're going to click OK. Now, if you kind of see here on the top view, there's the camera there. These lines here indicate the focal range that it can see. So everything that it sees here, it sees within its focal range. And as we saw here, this circle widget, so this camera is essentially seeing everything in what's in this focal view. It would actually go further out this way if the lines came out. And the top line here is basically where it's focused. So if we click on the camera icon here, let's pull up the position properties of it right now. So if you press P, now this is the only tricky thing is with cameras, you got to understand how this works. So you press P, you also have to hold down the letter A. Sorry, not hold down, press Shift A. And that brings up the two things you need to think of. Now, if you look at here, I'll just bring it all up. There is a few different items with the camera. There's the point of interest, there's the position, orientation, rotation, and then there's these other parameters, which is the zoom, depth of field, focus, aperture. We're only going to focus on these two, the aperture and the focus distance. Sorry, the focus distance, the aperture, and whether to turn depth of field on. Now, depth of field is essentially what it sounds like. You turn the depth of field on. You can, it is useful to have it off in certain circumstances, but in this case, we're going to turn it on. So right now the aperture is very, very low, and at the moment it doesn't look like it affects anything. But however, if we do turn the aperture up, you can kind of see that the background, the circle, which is further away from the camera, is starting to go out of focus. And that's because the focus point is actually on this particular piece of text and not on the circles in the background. However, we can choose where we want to put the focus point on by clicking on this button here. And if you look at the box on the right here, you'll see that a little line comes out and is actually going towards our element in the back. And then you can kind of see, oh, there you go, the background is actually in focus. You can kind of see the difference, right? So that's kind of the mechanics of the camera at a glance, essentially. And what we're going to do now is actually we're going to use the camera to actually do a move on the footage that we have right now. So let's just go up to the 1 second mark. Now you're just going to trust me on this one. I don't really know how to explain it, but you need to click both of these things. So you need to set a keyframe on both of these, and we're going to go back to the beginning. And this is where the camera tools up here become very handy. So there are three tools. There's the orbit, track, and the Z tool. Now this is the unified camera tool. I don't really use it. You can use it. I'm sure there are people who do, but I don't use it that much. I like using the individual tools because it makes more sense to me. And right now what we're going to do is we want the camera to track from the back. So if you can imagine this from the top view, we want it to start from here and then move up to this position here. So we're going to do that. So if we look here, I'm going to click here in this space where it looks like nothing's happening. I'm going to click here and I'm going to, as you can see, as I start dragging it down, the camera is moving back. And so what you would expect is that if you kind of watch both positions, you can kind of see the camera, as we move forward, the camera is moving, as we scrub forward, you can kind of see the camera is tracking forward, which is just adding a little bit more movement on what's happening there. And likewise, you can put a easy ease keyframe in. So we're going to easy ease that in, so it looks like it's not coming to a dead stop. Now what we're going to do is we're going to, once we've had it come on, we're going to see if we can make it transition off. So we're just going to zoom. What we're going to do is we're going to zoom straight past everything. So again, let's bring up the position. Let's bring up the transform properties again. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to copy these. So copy these keyframes because we want the camera to stand still. And then what we're going to do is we're going to paste these keyframes right here. So it feels like it stands still. And then what we're going to do is make it move off. So we're going to make the camera track through the text. And we're going to do that again by using this tool. Again, we're picking the track Z tool, or the Z tool for you Americans out there. And we're going to go straight through the text. And I'm actually going to turn the easy easing off this one. So what I'm going to do is hold these two, and I'm just going to go keyframe. Oh, sorry, not keyframe assistant. I'm just going to hold the Option or the Start button and press that. Oh, sorry, the Alt button and press that, and it converts it back to linear keyframes. So, and then I'm going to press, and we're going to shrink this back down, or you can press N to just bring that back. You can do it that way, or you can just press N and that shrinks it back to that area, and then we can kind of see what we've done here. Alright, so we have our base animation basically done, so that's a good sort of foundation that we can kind of build from here. So we're just going to add a few more extra flourishes to just really make it pop. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to jump into this circle widget comp. So we're going to highlight the circle widget, and we're just going to double click on it, and we're going to jump in here, and we're going to grab the outermost circle here, and we're just going to copy it. So edit copy, or Control C or Control C or Command C, and we're going to paste it in here, and that's just going to be Control V or Command V. Alright, so it just pastes itself back into the center of the thing. Now we're just going to turn on the 3D layer, so we're just going to click on this little cube box to turn it on. As you saw up there, it brings up a little widget. I'll just show you what happens. So it's flat here, as you can see, because we're looking down from a 3D perspective. The 3D is not registering because in this viewpoint it just looks like a flat shape no matter which viewpoint you're in. So if we were to switch this over to the left point of view, it would still come up as a flat shape, which just tells us that it's not a 3D shape. However, if we do go back to the top view and we do turn this on, it automatically flips it. So now it's actually a 3D shape, and now it's got that little widget on it with the Z or the Z widget on it. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to pull this forward. So you could do it from here, or you can do it from the coordinates here. So we're going to press P to get up our positioning shortcut. And we're just going to move these three coordinates. So in 3D space, the three coordinates here is the X, the Y, and the Z space. So the X just refers to this plane going left and right. The Y plane goes up and down, and the Z plane goes backwards and forwards in space. And we want to bring it forward in space. So we're going to bring this to the left, so the numbers go into the minuses. And then we're going to bring it to the right, and then we're going to pull it down. You could alternatively just do this with your mouse as well. Likewise, you can just pull this backwards and forwards like this, and then use the Y and X widgets to do the same thing, or you can just do it manually like this. So there we go. We've got a little bit of a depth thing here. And so what we've got is three elements in space, just to kind of give it a little bit more interest for the viewer that, you know, there's a lot of depth here. We can probably even make it a bit wider. just to kind of give it a bit more interest here. So we just have a look at the whole thing. You can kind of see that it just gives a little bit more interest, a few foreground elements, that kind of thing. All right, now just to finish off this little animation, we're just going to add the pen tool and just put a line right in the middle here, just to kind of give it a little bit of a design look. So I'm just going to get out of this 2 view just so that we can just have a look at this. Go back to the active camera, just so we have a nice looking view of this. Now, if this, for example, if you think this is too soft at the front here and this is too soft at the back, you can actually dial in the depth of field. So if you twirl down and we'll turn up the transform properties and we go to the aperture. If you dial down the aperture, let's say we dial it down, you can kind of see everything starts to come into focus. And the more the aperture, the lower the aperture, the more focus everything will be, which just means the depth of field plane is getting wider and wider. But if you do want that shallow depth of field, you can just dial it up as much as you want. And you can move that focal plane around if you want to try and really dial in where you want that focal plane to be. So I hope that makes sense. And you can keyframe that focal plane as well. So for example, if we wanted it to be in focus if we wanted it to be in focus the whole time, we can actually set the focus distance. So we'll set the focus distance to where it should be, which is there. And if we dial it back, we can actually dial in the focus distance and roll this back so that it is in focus somewhere around, there you go. So we can say that it's in focus the whole time. We'll press F9 to get the keyframe easy ease. And then we'll press play and have a look. So there you go. It's more in focus more of the time rather than it being out of focus. But I do like how it sort of starts out of focus. So I'm going to leave it as that. But yeah, and the depth of field is where I want it to be. So there we go. Now the final tool is the pen tool. Now the pen tool is nice because you get to customize the shapes that you want. And at the moment we've only been using predetermined shapes, but if you use the pen tool, you can actually make your own shape. So we'll go up here to the pen tool. You can press G as well. You got a couple of different options. We can make this a solid. So just so you understand, we can actually just make a straight solid if we want to. All we have to do is just create a shape, and it can be whatever shape you want, which is kind of great. And so it doesn't have any of the parameters like the other shapes where you can muck around with the parameters and make it a particular shape, but you can muck around with the points and make it whatever you want. And these points are also keyframeable, so they can move around. You can actually set a keyframe and then move it around, and it'll actually change over time, which is kind of fun. But that's not what we want to do. What we want to do is just create a straight line. And so we're going to turn this solid off, and we're just going to turn the stroke on. What we're going to do is just draw a straight line underneath what we're doing here. So we're going to start around there, and we're going to hold down shift, because if you don't hold down shift, you may click down here by accident. So we're going to hold down shift so it's a perfectly straight line, and click there, and it's a perfectly straight line. Now, as you look here, what we want to happen is that we want the line to appear right underneath, and because it's not a 3D object, it won't. So we're going to turn the 3D on, and magically it'll just appear in the right position. Now, the reason why it just magically appears and we don't have to adjust anything is because it's dead center. When you automatically turn on the 3D default, it's dead center of the comp. So in this instance, it is in the right place because we have set it up that way. So, but if it's not, you have to kind of move it around. And if you need to see where to move it around to get it in the right space, you can go to one of these views. Like for example, the left view, it's like if it happened to appear and it wasn't in the right, like for example, if it was back here, you just have to move it to the spot where, for example, if you want to move it under the word After Effects, you can kind of see this is where it is. And so what we're going to do is move that here until we get it in line with everything else. Was it that? Yeah, it was that one. All right. So let's go back to the active camera. I hope this is not going over you guys' heads. It is. I know it's your first tutorial, but it's not as hard as you think it is. All right. So I've just turned the stroke down to 1. And we're going to do the trim path thing, where we're going to add the trim path function to it so you can actually look like the line has been drawn on. So we'll go to about here because we want the line to draw on round about here. And we're going to roll down and we're going to go add trim path, and we're going to go forward about, I don't know, maybe about 10 frames. And we're going to twirl down the trim path thing here which is under the contents. So if you go to contents and then trim path will be underneath the shape here. Or if you can't find the trim path, it may have jumped into the shape here. So if you have the shape selected and you add trim path, it can jump into the shape, which is by what happens when you do select the path. Otherwise, if it's unselected, it'll just jump outside, which is fine either way. So what we're going to do is set the end path to 100%, which is the endpoint, and we're going to set the endpoint. So we're going to go to the beginning and we're going to set it to 0. And that is going to be pretty much it. And there you go, you see it. And if you want the line to draw on a little bit longer, you just pull the keyframes out. So here we go, let's have a look. That's looking pretty tight. And it should just draw off, and it should just go off by itself. All right, so your project is pretty much ready to go. You finished it, you want to send it out to clients. So what do? How do you get this out of After Effects to do your bidding, basically? Well, there's a couple of things you can do. The easiest way is to just use the media renderer inside After Effects. So what we do is make sure that you select what you want to render. If you don't want any of this thing at the back here, can you see here that I'm pressing plus and minus to basically get the timeline to zoom up and zoom down. So if you don't want any of this stuff at the back here, my suggestion is to just this work area bar, you just want to make sure that it starts at, you press B to where you want it to start. So at this point, you want to start at the beginning. Press B to start to make the end point for where you want it to start, and press N to where you want it to end. So the letter N. And if it was, for example, if the work area was out here, it would render everything out here as well, which is all the empty space, but which we don't want. But we just wanted to finish off around there, just where it just ends. And so we're going to press the letter N to set the out point. Once we figured out what we want to render and that we're 100% sure that this is what we want to export out of the timeline, we'll just go to composition and go add to render queue. And it'll bring up this box here. Now, so at the moment, the default is lossless, and so we don't want it to be lossless because the lossless codec is a bit out of date. I don't know why it's the default in After Effects, but it is currently. Now, it depends on what system you're on. I'm going to use ProRes in this particular instance, but you can use whatever codec you feel is comfortable for you. I think on, I'm not 100% sure what they use on PC at the moment, but if whatever codec you prefer to use, you can use that. You can use MP4, you can use AVI, whatever codec is supported in your computer. Now, what you do here is make sure this is set at best setting, and also pull this down, and we're going to make a template. And this is going to bring up this new dialog box. Don't worry, it's not too scary. Now, what we're going to do is make our own template. So we're going to go video codec, whatever that might be. In this case, it happens to be ProRes, so we're just going to call it ProRes. And now we're going to edit it. And it'll bring up a whole bunch of module settings. In this instance, I'm using QuickTime as my wrapper, and I'm going to pick the video output and format options. At the moment, it says animation. Now I want that codec to go to ProRes 422 LT, and press OK. Now everything else here is fine. Audio will just be the default as it is, and we're just going to go OK. Now up here, the movie default would have been lossless, so it would have been that. We're going to change that movie default to video codec ProRes, which is the one we just created, and we're just going to go OK. Now that is set to go as that codec. Now you have to tell it where you want it to render to, otherwise it will just render into a default After Effects folder and you'll never be able to find it. So what we're going to do here is click on this title here, and we're just going to pick a place that we're going to send it to. Now in this case, I have a folder already set up, and we're just going to press save. And then all we have to do is just press render, and we'll let it go. And that little sound reminder tells you that it is done. And if we go back and have a look here at what we've actually rendered, the video file will be in there. Thanks for listening, guys. I'm really excited to see what you guys come up with. If you want to post it somewhere and send it to Josh or I'd love to be able to see what you guys come up with. If you have anything else that you want me to try and figure out, I would, like effects from a movie or a K-pop video or something along those lines, I would love to know, and I would love to figure it out for you guys. So hit up Josh or send it to his Instagram account. Come to my channel if you want as well, which is just linked somewhere in this video, and I'll see you next time.
Yo, I think Nick's voice could soothe the most savage of beasts. Thanks so much for watching. You can check out Nick's Instagram here and check out his website here. He is literally one of the best VFX artists you could ever hire. We've done a lot of VFX work together. Thank you so much again for watching, guys. Make sure to check out Envato Elements below. And as always, remember to keep it chill.